Good Monday evening to you and welcome to Court TV Live. I'm your host, Julie Grant, filling in tonight for Vinnie Politan, who has the night off. Wow, today has been a very big day in the pizza delivery murder trial we've been covering for you out of Akron, Ohio. As of today, all the evidence is in, and now Erica Stefanko's life is in the hands of the jury. Now, those jurors deliberating for less than 2 hours today before they decided to go home for the evening. But before they began, they had their chance to hear closing arguments from both sides. Let's take a look back at some of that together now.
The evidence and testimony have proved that Erica Stefanko, that Chad Cobb could not have committed the murder of Ashley Biggs by himself. And again, we are not saying Chad Cobb is not guilty. He absolutely is guilty. That's why he is doing life without parole. He is paying for his part. We want you to hold Erica Stefanko accountable for the part she played in the murder of Ashley Biggs. How else did the defendant, Erica Stefanko, assist, aid, encourage, abet Chad? Well, she is the one who placed the call to Domino's, luring Ashley Biggs to her death. How do we know that? Again, her own statements acknowledging she made the phone call to Cindy Cobb. You have Chad's testimony that she placed that call. You have GC's testimony that she heard the defendant place that call. GC remembered being in the back of an automobile, it being pitch black dark out. Look at the pictures of the crime scene. It is pitch black dark out there.
All right, that was Felicia Easter, one of the prosecutors representing the state of Ohio in this case. We'll take a look at the defense side in just a moment. But first, I want to bring in two of my colleagues now. Court TV legal correspondent Shanley Painter been in the courtroom for us today, joining us live from Akron, Ohio tonight. And also joining us, Court TV special contributor Ashley Banfield is here. Good evening to both of you ladies. And Shanley, I want to begin with you, if I may, please. I know that you spoke to some friends and family of Ashley Biggs, who is the victim in this case. Tell us about what they had to share with you, please.
Yeah, Julie, so they've been watching very closely this trial over the last week, and especially today, now that we're in verdict watch. All the evidence is in, the closing arguments, and they have some things to share with us about how this trial has been portrayed, or how Ashley Biggs has been portrayed. They overall seem a little disappointed in that the jury didn't hear about the true Ashley Biggs, according to her friends and family, that she was a loving person, that she was a good mother. And so they wanted to speak to us to make sure that we understood who she was and what surprised them during the trial. One of those big heart-wrenching moments, though, for her friends and family had to be during the testimony of how Ashley Biggs died. In fact, I spoke with her best friend, Courtney Boswell. Let's listen.
Literally just hearing just how much he hit her or beat her, it made my heart just explode. My heart just fell into my stomach. Just some of the things that nobody should have to go through that. Like, nobody should have to spend the last minutes of their life, like, afraid. And, like, when Chad said how worked up she was, like, I can just imagine her sitting in her car and looking up and just, like, the fear that was in her eyes. And she begged him, Chad, you do not have to do this. Those were some of her last words. Chad, you do not have to do this. Like, I just can't imagine it. I mean, she didn't deserve that.
Julie, her friends and family wish they could be in the courtroom every day of the trial because of COVID-19 restrictions. They have not been able to be here because the jury takes up virtually the entire courtroom spread out. But they've been watching, following along. They're hoping that they can actually somehow virtually zoom in during the actual reading of the verdict. They're trying to work on that, but they wanted everyone to know that when Chad Cobb was going through this process almost 7 years ago, that they showed up in force for every hearing and his sentencing, his plea, everything, at least a couple of dozen friends and family there.
No doubt they are very supportive of their loved one, Ashley Biggs, certainly Chanley. And Ashley, I want to ask you about something that Chanley hit on, and that was how those friends and family members said they were disappointed that Ashley Biggs wasn't more of a focal point. And for you, especially being such a master storyteller, when you're a trial attorney and you're telling a story, how important do you think it is that the jury feels something, whether you're on the state side and it's feeling heartbreak for Ashley Biggs and what her family went through, or on the defense side and maybe feeling sorry for defendant Erica Stefanko? What are your thoughts, please?
I think if you're the state, you want to humanize Ashley Biggs as much as you can. You want to get this jury mad, frustrated, angry that this mother lost her life and that it was completely unjust. If you're the defense, you don't want her picture anywhere. You don't want the word mother anywhere. You want to do your best to just assuage all of that. But you can't, you can't pick and choose what your opponent's going to say in court. So I don't know if they did that job for this jury, if the state did that job for this jury. I don't know if the defense did the job of pointing out this woman as a mother as well and humanizing her enough. It's sort of the battle of the mom figures maybe in that court. It really all comes down to what you just said. Who is the better storyteller? Who is able to connect better with the jury? Because honestly, Julie, I don't have to tell you, and Chanley, you both know this, being great lawyers, you know that juries don't always really understand the concept of reasonable doubt. Believe it or not, it's the number one question every jury asks. What's the definition of reasonable doubt? And you and I and everybody watching should know. It's what's reasonable to you. Do you have a reasonable doubt? That's the definition right there. But I think juries feel like this must be more serious, more professional. There must be a more concrete example or definition that we have to meet because the stakes are so high. And there's the rub. Yeah, the stakes are high. And this comes from your gut and your heart and your brain. So make it work.
Right. Excellent points you made, Ashley. It's funny, reasonable doubt, I'm with you all the way. It's one of those really abstract kind of concepts in the law that sometimes becomes overthought in jury rooms. And when you were sharing that, Ashley, I couldn't help but thinking back to after a trial, I spoke to a jury, and this was a trial that I lost. And I was stunned that I lost. It was a delivery of drugs to an undercover police officer. And there was some conflicting testimony. So I was kind of like, okay. I went and talked to the jurors, and I was horrified when they told me that they went around the room and they came up with their own definitions of reasonable doubt because they wasn't sure whose definition to believe, mine or the defense attorney. So that really happened, one for the books.
Wow.
And, speaking of defense attorneys, Kerry O'Brien certainly had a tough job with this one. Let's play a little clip from his defense closing argument. I'll ask you ladies for some thoughts on the other side.
Here's a person who's admitted his guilt, admitted that he beat, admitted that he strangled Ashley Biggs, killed her. And yet now he's trying to get out of it. How credible is that kind of person? That's for you folks to decide. Remember, I used an opening statement, and Judge Jones will tell you, and you've heard these jury instructions already, you are free to believe all of what someone testifies to, part of what they testify to, or none of what they testify to.
Right, tough job defense counsel has in this case. Chanley, want to ask you, what were any reactions you might have observed from the jurors, and what were some of the highlights maybe for you in the defense closing argument?
Kerry O'Brien has this boisterous voice inside the courtroom, Julie. It really feels the space and he moves around a lot. It really seems to engage the jurors who'd already listened to about an hour's worth of the prosecution closing argument at that point. And I noticed a lot of them leaning in, but then there's a couple that would give the kind of nod that they were listening. It wasn't like, I agree with you kind of nod, but just that they were following along and listening to what he had to say and argue. The most overt reaction, however, to the defense closing was from Erica Stefanko herself. If you recall earlier today, there was this short little 5-minute break before Kerry O'Brien came back and sort of had a couple of final points. Well, this is her during the break, and she puts her mask down and she leans over to, I believe it was Ms. Cottrell, her co-counsel attorney at the time, and she mouths something, and it looks to me as if she's saying she is really mad right now, is what that seems to be, if I'm reading her lips correctly, Julie. But again, this is after her defense closing argument, so maybe he came back to make a couple final points that she wanted made there at the end.
Wow, boy, that's really something. I'm glad we're replaying that for those who might have missed that. You wonder, what exactly is she mad about? The one question I wanted to ask you tonight, Ashley, going into this, was about Erica Stefanko's decision not to testify. And I wondered on Friday if she went home over the weekend and perhaps regretted that. And I wouldn't have been surprised if everybody returned to the courtroom today and if her attorney made a plea to the judge to try to reopen the defense case for that to happen. Nothing would have surprised me at this point. But I want to get your thoughts on that. What do you think her decision not to testify did or didn't do to the defense case?
Gosh, if I, had a dime for every time I've asked that question of every case I've covered, I'd be in Tahiti on a 90-foot yacht. But in all seriousness, I just have to say, I'm looking at this picture right now, and when she brought her mask down a little bit, I'm just digressing for a second, Julie, I hope you'll indulge me. When she brought her mask down, it reminded me how much we're missing in this kind of process during COVID. And I'm angry about it, because I feel like if you want to be in perfect judgment of someone, you need to have all the facts, all the communication. The reason we have people appear in person on the stand is because we want to look at their faces, mostly their eyes, but we want to look at them because there are millions of signals that we give off that are nonverbal. And when she pulled that mask down, I thought, oh God, I'm looking at another person. Wait, more. And I felt, well, have I not known the real person up till now? Because if I were a juror, I'd feel really uncomfortable about this. I'm always reminded sort of this notion that if I look at you in the camera right now and you look at my eyes, you'll probably see somebody who's got a slight, smiley kind of face, not overly. But if I were to look sort of gap-jawed, I'd have the same eyes, but my mouth would be saying something's wrong here. And yet you can't see that when there's a mask on. So I just think there are millions and millions of signals that we've been missing. And I don't know, maybe somewhere down the line, these will be reasons to overturn cases. I don't know. I don't want to put that bug out there into the zeitgeist, but the whole notion of her testifying or not testifying, back to your question, and I apologize, I really can't answer that, because I sometimes think they had to have had this down pat well before trial, right? They got the strategy. And then maybe something goes a little wacky during trial and they shift it up. But generally speaking, I never think that it's actually on the day. Like, you gotta have your ducks in a row before the day, unless your client has a total meltdown on the day and is going to perform abysmally. And you tell that client that. But then you always have those clients who don't give two you-know-whats about what you say. And they'll stomp right up their Eileen Warno style and they'll testify regardless, Scorched earth, I'll do it no matter what. So in her case, I can't tell you whether she'd have done herself any favors, because I don't believe I really know her. Thank you, mask.
That's such a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, Ashley. I think you're right. I think there is perhaps a challenge if she should be convicted. Perhaps this is an appealable issue. And we talk about the confrontation clause a lot on Court TV. Sixth Amendment, that right, and to confront one's witnesses against them. And it's largely been interpreted to mean a face-to-face confrontation. So to Ashley's point, Chanley, in following this case from the start, and we know there were delays and whatnot, and defense made several challenges, are you aware of any that defense might have made that pertain to COVID-19 hindering that right to confront the witnesses against one's?
You know, actually, that's interesting because the prosecution made the motions for more delay because of COVID-19. You really think that traditionally the defendant would. And this motion was made last week. Well, I guess it would be the week before the day of jury selection that morning. And the defense actually objected, wanted to go forward with the trial. They did, however, object in pretrial hearings and even during the trial to witnesses appearing and testifying virtually. That was something that was put on the record several times, and the defense wanted those witnesses to be there in person, again, face to face, even though there are those masks. And I just have to say, inside the courtroom, because we do this all the time at Court TV, and I'm inside the courtroom, I'm watching parties and witnesses and jurors testify. It's even difficult for me to do my job, which is to kind of gauge reaction of jurors and see what's going on with the defendant because of the mask. So I can't imagine actually being a juror and really trying to weigh credibility and determine really the fate of a defendant when half of her face is covered.
Yes, yes. I want to take a look together at another clip. This is again from defense counsel Kerry O'Brien in his close. And here, at this point, he's pointing the finger at Chad Cobb's mother, Cindy Cobb. Let's watch.
Ladies and gentlemen, with respect to the phone call that Mr. Travis received at the pizza shop, he tells us that it's a female, and yet he's pretty sure that it's not a male. Well, you also heard that from the Verizon person that there are cell towers, not only close to that 647 West Turkey Foot, but there are also cell towers out in Rittman and Doylestown. And who would be living in the Rittman Doylestown that is a female that you've heard her name many, many times during this closing argument and during the testimony? And that person would be Cindy Cobb.
Oh, Cindy Cobb, a critical witness with a key piece of evidence. That's for sure, that recording where Erica Stefanko makes those admissions about making the fatal pizza call. Ashley, I want to ask you about that piece of evidence, if I can. How much do you think this solidifies the case for the state, or doesn't it? Because really, we heard today in the closing that the state delivered in rebuttal that they really want the jury to focus on Erica Stefanko's words, those words heard in that recording that was very hard to hear, too, might I add. Your thoughts on that, please.
So I'm going to do charades for you. On a scale this much, I think it's this important. And I say that because I thought it at the moment when I heard it that, that is, without question, the thing that gave me the biggest thud in this case, and that would be the thud about her doom. And then I heard what the jury asked for. And they asked for two things: jury instructions, because I'm guessing they want to know the definition of reasonable doubt, maybe some other things. But they also want the recording. So those are the two things they asked for after 2 hours of, getting to know one another. Hopefully that's the first time they're doing that. So I don't think it bodes well. And I think her attorneys, once they heard that the jury wants that recording, probably should have had a chat with her and said, listen, you need to be prepared.
Right. That's key going into this. I mean, we know that there were several times she was asked, the court asked, is there any way these parties here before the court can resolve this, essentially? And it was our understanding that she was not amenable to any type of plea negotiations. Let's take a look at a clip on rebuttal. This is the state's rebuttal to the defense arguments. This is done by Brian Laprinzi, the other state attorney, and he's talking about that 3-hour recorded conversation.
Mr. O'Brien said, we've all been in that situation where we just said something that we really didn't mean, just to kind of get the person out of my face. Well, if that's what she was doing, it didn't work, because she still sat there and talked voluntarily for 3 whole hours. 3 hours. And not only that, She repeated herself multiple times, saying the same inculpatory things over and over and over again. Now, we're not going to tell you that there's 3 hours of great stuff in there. There's stuff in there about nothing. There's stuff in there about the kids. There's stuff in there about Chad Cobb being somewhat abusive to her. She alludes to the fact that maybe he did something to her. But at no time in 3 hours, not once, not a one time, does Erica Stefanko say, I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. I didn't make the call. I didn't drop him off. I didn't do anything, and he is lying. You never hear that word one time.
All right, gotta love all that passion and fire in that close. And before we close this particular segment, Chanley, I want to ask you tomorrow, when is the jury due back to continue deliberating?
They're back to work at 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow to resume deliberations verdict watch after ending a little less than 2 hours today. They'll take a short lunch and they will deliberate until they can reach a verdict.
Very good. We will see what happens. Chanley Painter, Ashley Banfield, thank you both so much.